Picture the story you heard as a child: a miller's daughter, a mountain of straw, and a mysterious little man who can spin it into gold if she pays his price. But in the original Brothers Grimm tale, the king threatens the girl with death, locks her alone in rooms filled with straw, and demands so much gold that she must promise her firstborn child. This was not a fable about cleverness. It was a transaction, and the currency was human life. The truth behind Rumpelstiltskin exposes a world where selling your child was terrifyingly real. So why did generations keep this horror hidden inside a bedtime story? Imagine a nursery scene in the late 19th century. Andrew Lang's Blue Fairy Book brought Rumpelstiltskin into English-speaking nurseries as a gentle bedtime favorite. The story most people remember is almost charming in its simplicity. A poor miller, eager to impress, claims his daughter can spin straw into gold. The king, greedy, but in this version not especially cruel, locks the girl in a room and promises great reward if she succeeds. Night after night, a comical little man appears, spinning straw into glittering gold in exchange for small tokens, a necklace, a ring, a promise. When the girl finally runs out of trinkets, she promises her firstborn child. But the story does not dwell on that bargain. Instead, it skips ahead to a happy ending. The girl becomes queen, the imp returns to collect his due, and she outsmarts him by guessing his name. Rumpelstiltskin, caught in his own game, stomps away in defeat. The child is saved, the queen is clever, and the king's castle is filled with laughter. In Lang's 1889 retelling, the darkness is softened. There are no threats, no real sense of danger, just a puzzle to be solved and a silly little man with a tongue twister of a name. The miller is foolish but harmless, the king is more curious than cruel, and the mysterious helper is almost a figure of fun. The promise of the firstborn comes across as a light-hearted wager, not a desperate act. The entire tale feels wrapped in the safe glow of the nursery, with every shadow banished by the certainty that everything will turn out all right. This is the version that settled into popular memory, a story of cleverness, luck, and a mother's love, where the only price paid is a bit of suspense and a clever riddle. For generations, parents read it aloud as a harmless fantasy, never questioning what lay beneath its golden surface. The original Grimm text offers no comfort. It opens on a locked door and a direct threat. The king orders the miller's daughter to spin a whole room of straw into gold by morning, or she will die. In the 1857 edition, the language is blunt. Jack Zipes renders it, "If by morning you have not spun this straw into gold, you will have to die." There is no misunderstanding. The girl is not given a puzzle or a game. She is trapped, alone, with her life hanging on the impossible. Each night, the king increases the pressure. The first room is filled with straw. The second room holds even more. The third room is the largest of all. The little man appears, not as a jester, but as a creditor. He asks, "What will you give me if I spin all this straw into gold for you?" Desperate, the girl offers her necklace. On the second night, she offers her ring. On the third night, with nothing left, he demands her first child. The text is clear. He says, "Then promise me, when you are queen, your first child." She promises, because she does not know what else to do. The king has threatened her with death, and there is no one to help. The king does not reward cleverness. He marries her only after she has filled his coffers with gold. It is a transaction, not a romance. The marriage comes as the final payment, after she has survived 3 nights of terror and made a bargain she cannot possibly keep. The baby is not a metaphor. In the Grimm text, the child is the price of survival. The little man returns, ready to collect, and the queen begs for mercy, offering all her wealth. He refuses. Only the impossible, guessing his name, can save her child now. This is not a story about cleverness or luck. It is about a girl forced to trade everything she owns and then everything she is, just to stay alive. The threat is real. The payment is real. The fairy tale records a world where a child could be pledged to pay a debt. If you want more stories that reveal the hidden violence behind familiar tales, and the documents that prove it, subscribe now. This is the disturbing truth behind Rumpelstiltskin, about how parents pledged, sold, and sometimes abandoned their children. In the early 1800s, two brothers from Hesse, Germany, set out to collect the stories whispered in kitchens and spinning rooms. Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm recorded a version around 1808, and they captured it as Rumpelstiltskin in an Eulenburg manuscript by 1810. Those handwritten pages, still preserved in Kassel, show a rougher, more relentless story than the one later printed. The Grimms revised the text for their first edition of Kinder- und Hausmärchen in 1812, and again for a final polished edition in 1857. With each rewrite, the story was reshaped for changing audiences, but the central bargain, the promise of a child for help, remained intact. Folklorists now classify this tale as a TU 500, called the name of the supernatural helper. It is not unique to Germany. In England, a girl bargains with a goblin named Tom Tit Tot. In France, a similar tale called Richten Richten appeared as early as 1705. Across Europe, versions of this plot travelled from mouth to mouth, adapting to local fears and customs, but always circling back to the same chilling exchange: a desperate parent, an impossible task, and a child pledged as payment. The reach of these stories goes far beyond the Grimm's notebooks. In 2016, researchers at Durham University and Nova Lisbon used phylogenetic analysis to trace the roots of such tales. Their findings suggest the narrative skeleton behind Rumpelstiltskin, striking a bargain with a supernatural fixer and offering up a child, could be 2,500 to 6,000 years old. That places its origins in the ancient past, possibly the Bronze Age, long before any printed fairy tale collections. The same basic plot appears in dozens of languages and cultures, mutated but recognizable, a persistent anxiety running beneath centuries of oral tradition. The process of collecting, editing, and classifying Rumpelstiltskin reveals more than the evolution of a story. It shows how generations of storytellers and editors worked to soften and sometimes disguise a tale that was never merely a riddle or a bedtime diversion. The manuscripts and the international map of variants make clear this is not a local curiosity, but a story that has haunted families for centuries, echoing the real bargains struck in the shadows of survival. Imagine a winter evening in a German town where a room hums with women at work. Spinning was more than a chore. It was the backbone of household survival. Daughters, mothers, and widows is gathered through long winter evenings, twisting flax and wool into yarn by candlelight. What they produced was not just thread, but the very currency that kept families afloat. Spun yarn could be sold at market, traded for food, or saved for a daughter's dowry. In many households, a woman's spindle brought in more income than a man's fieldwork. The spinning room was also a space of power. Women exchanged news, shared stories, and sometimes poked fun at the men who depended on their labor. Jack Zipes, in his 1993 essay, Spinning with Fate, argues that spinning in these tales is never just about making thread. It is about female creativity, skill, and the quiet agency women carved out in a world that offered them few choices. The miller's daughter, locked away and forced to spin alone, is cut off from this community and stripped of her real-world power. Instead of producing yarn that could clothe and sustain a family, she is forced to make useless gold, a satirical in-joke for anyone who understood that gold thread, no matter how dazzling, was worthless if it could not be woven or sold. By the early 1800s, that world was vanishing. Industrial spinning mills pushed women out of their economy. Machines replaced hand spinners, and wages plummeted. The last generation of women who grew up in spinning rooms watched their independence slip away. In this context, the locked chamber in the tale becomes a symbol of lost independence, a woman's skill twisted into something strange and profitless, her labor appropriated by men who controlled her fate. Yet the story leaves a trace of resistance. In the final confrontation, the Queen's victory comes not from brute force or royal decree, but from knowledge, from learning the little man's name. Naming in this tale is more than a trick. It is the act of reclaiming agency, of turning an anonymous threat into something known and therefore beatable. For women who had seen their work devalued and their choices vanish, this was a small but meaningful assertion of power, to name the oppressor, and in speaking his name, to send him away. Imagine a narrow city street at night, a cradle left on a church step, a mother disappearing into the dark because she sees no other choice. Across 19th century Europe, that scene was not a rare tragedy, but part of daily life. By the middle of the 19th century, historians estimate that about 120,000 infants were abandoned every year across the continent. In crowded cities like Paris, Naples, and Vienna, the numbers climbed even higher. In some neighborhoods, as many as 1 in 4 births ended with a child left at a church, a hospital, or on the street. For many poor and unmarried mothers, the choice was not between raising a child or not, but between impossible hunger and the faint hope that someone else might take their baby. The word to remember here is abandoned. The infrastructure for that crisis was centuries in the making. In 1198, the Ospedale di Santo Spirito in Rome installed Europe's first known foundling wheel, a revolving wooden cylinder built into the wall, so a mother could slide her infant inside and ring a bell for the nuns without being seen. By around 1400, these wheels had spread across Catholic Europe. In Florence, the Ospedale degli Innocenti became famous for its wheel, a device that let desperate parents relinquish newborns anonymously, day or night. Hospitals in Paris, Vienna, Seville, and dozens of other cities developed their own wheels or hatches. These devices were not mere charity. They were engineered solutions to a social emergency, designed to absorb a constant flow of unwanted and unkeepable children. Think of the wheel as both invention and admission, a mechanism that said this problem was permanent. Churches and civic authorities did not merely tolerate abandonment, they organized it. Foundling hospitals rose beside cathedrals and palaces, their ledgers swelling with the names of new arrivals, each entry marking another child surrendered to the system, another family's silent transaction. The wheels turned quietly in the night, collecting infants that poverty, shame, or law had pushed out of the home. The scale of this machinery is hard to grasp. Tens of thousands every year, and hundreds of thousands over a generation. In that shadow, the fairy tale bargain of a firstborn child as payment was not a fantasy. It was a grim reality, made of wood, iron, and the cold logic of survival. Picture this. Every spring, in the shadow of the Alps, thousands of children set out on foot, some as young as 5 or 6. They crossed mountain passes into Upper Swabia, not for school or family, but to be rented out as labor. These were the Swabenkinder, peasant boys and girls from Austria and Switzerland, led in long lines to crowded markets where German farmers inspected their hands and teeth like livestock. Contracts were simple, a season's work for a pittance, paid to parents or to the brokers who organized the journey. In 1908, an American newspaper described these gatherings as barely concealed slave markets. The term was not an exaggeration. Children were bartered openly, their futures decided by the highest bidder. The custom had deep roots in law and custom. Under the Roman idea of patria potestas, a father had the legal authority to control and even sell his children. The 12 tables stated that if a father sells his son 3 times, the son shall be free from the father. The law did not question the sale itself, only how many times it could be done. For centuries, this principle echoed through European legal systems. Medieval and early modern contracts survive in city archives, showing parents signing away a child's labor for cash, sometimes for years at a time, sometimes with no promise of return. By the 18th century, the machinery of child transfer had grown more bureaucratic. In London, the Foundling Hospital opened its doors in 1741. Between 1741 and 1760, 16,282 infants were admitted. When Parliament ordered the hospital to accept every child presented, nearly 15,000 babies flooded in within just 5 years. The numbers are cold and final. Of all those children, about 2/3 died. Only 152 were ever reclaimed by their mothers. The rest were shuffled between wet nurses, hospital wards, and countryside foster homes, their fates recorded in ledgers as briefly as any sales slip. For administrators and intermediaries, children became entries on a balance sheet. For desperate parents, they were collateral, something to be pledged, rented, or given up entirely when there was nothing else left. The ledgers and contracts remain, silent proof that the promise at the heart of Rumpelstiltskin was not a fairy tale invention, but a fact of daily life, measured in signatures, receipts, and mortality rolls. Today, anonymous baby hatches still operate in cities from Berlin to Seoul, echoing centuries-old choices forced by poverty, stigma, and desperation. The ledger that once tallied straw and gold now counts lives, surrendered to invisible markets. When a child is treated as collateral, the story is never just a fairy tale. It is a warning whispered from the past, asking if we have really changed. Share your thoughts below.